All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're really excited to have you join us. I think since we started the webinar at the beginning of this year, we've covered a variety of topics. And given that, end of year is approaching, we wanted to go back to the basics and have a conversation, a practical conversation on a buyer's guide to AI and contact centers, talking about how do you go from purchasing AI, implementing AI in your workflows, work streams, to actually proving the return on investment? I am Sneha, and for those of you who are new in the audience, I head the business value and analytics team here at Observe.ai, and I'm joined by my lovely co-host, John. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sneha. My name's John McMullen. I'm a director of product marketing, focused on our AI agents here at Observe.
Awesome. And I'm thrilled to introduce our guest expert, and that's Brian Trumbull, a contact center leader who has led several AI ROI-driven AI transformations in the organizations that he's been part of in the past. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to share your valuable expertise and insights with the audience today. I know that bio barely scratches the surface of the experience you bring to the table. So before we get into the meat of the conversation, would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you, Sneha. Thank you, John, as well. It's great to be here today to discuss a topic that's been so near and dear to my heart for so many years. But at the core of everything, I have spent my career in operations and contact center as a contact center transformation leader. I've been doing this for 25 years, primarily in the financial services, healthcare, and communications verticals. And as you mentioned before, I've had the privilege of leading three large-scale AI implementations across some very large companies, Fortune 200 companies, with a focus on business optimization and increasing revenue initiatives.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. Before we get into the actual conversation topic, for the audience, I do want to clear out some general housekeeping rules. The session is being recorded, so recording and follow-up resources will be sent to you post-webinar. And if you have any questions, as we go about this conversation, feel free to put in your questions in the Q&A chat section at any time, and somebody on our team will be monitoring those and responding to those. All right, let's get to it. So I'm not going to beat around the bush. I know this is a back to basics conversation, but it's so important, right? So we know AI has become a core component in boardroom conversations. Everybody wants to reap the benefits of deploying AI in their work streams, especially in contact centers. What we have noticed though is with so many different AI vendors and solutions popping up in this space, the purchasing decision has become a lot harder. And we're also seeing across different personas that the purchasing behavior is fundamentally different from typical software purchases. So my first question for you, Brian, is why is buying AI fundamentally different from the software purchases we've had in the past? And why do you think leaders fail when they treat AI just like another tool in the stack?
Well, that's a great question. It's because AI isn't a single user tool. So when you think about it, it's a organization-wide investment, and it focuses and touches so many different components of the business, the workflows, the staffing, coaching, and the customer experience. And I'm hearing the exact same things as I talk to people, particularly in the financial services market. I hear a lot of folks coming up and saying that they've been advised to find an AI project. They're looking for it, but they're not allowing the question of, and we'll get to this later, what we want to define first. What are the business objectives? And instead, what I'm hearing is let's get into AI and let's figure out how to do it. So there's a ton of interest, but there's not a lot of knowledge around how to actually go about purchasing, finding, and then implementing the new AI software. So where I see people fail a lot is when they're treating it like all of the previous implementations they've done instead of more thinking about it strategically as this is a shift in the way that we are going, strategic shift in the way that we're going to implement, the way that we're going to run our business, and then the way that we're going to drive value out of this as well. There's so many options, and we will get into this a little bit later today, I hope. The other component is just taking it simple. This is back to basics, but you can think of it simply as back to basics from an implementation perspective as well. And we always talk about crawl, walk, run. Um, there's ways that you can get into it very low risk for financial services companies. You don't need to jump right into automation. You can start with a conversational, intelligence and get right into building leadership confidence, getting confidence with the transcripts, driving insights, and then making sure that you have buy-in at the highest levels before you move in to some of the more advanced steps. And then I guess the last component that we'll touch on is just that investment curve specifically, since we are here to focus on ROI in the decision. It's a lot of people, I hear this as well, in the first 2 to 3 months where we're gonna start seeing our payback. We're gonna start driving ROI. And the reality of it is that's not how this works. Um, we've talked about is that's your investment period. That investment period could span 6 months or more, depending on your specific businesses. And really, what we're doing here today is trying to get into the details on how do you build that ROI, how do you set those expectations, and then how do you make sure that everyone is aligned and on the same page as you move forward, so you have a successful outcome for your project. And one of the examples, and we talked about this, is just about like AHT is such an easy one to pick on for contact centers. But you do hear this a lot. Like, so if we buy this, we're going to see a giant reduction in AHT, in 3 months or 6 months. And many times the answer is no. We can talk about some scenarios where it may go up and that would be beneficial to you, which is counterproductive. But the you've got to think about the lead up for this as your investment period. That's very important in making sure you set those expectations and you can define the curve on where you'll start seeing these benefits. And there are significant benefits.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ground to cover here. And I guess to kind of tee it off here at the top, in your network, and we're seeing a lot of this, leaders and orgs are saying, let's take on an AI initiative. And they're tapping contact center leaders to look at that and where to get started. But before somebody evaluates an AI vendor, what's kind of the first questions they should ask? Or where is the right starting point, to actually begin one of these assessments and then projects?
Yeah, thanks, John. So this is the old, question we hear people like, did you find a solution and then you're looking for how you can fit it into your organization, or are you actually defining a business case and do you have a need outlined? So I would say the first thing first is defining what are you trying to solve? What is your objective? What are you looking to do? As simple and silly as it says to say that, that's really where you need to start. What I found in doing all these implementations is that there's usually four buckets that you can get most of your benefits in and drive a significant component of the ROI. And it's operational efficiency, which is a lot on servicing side of the house or sales if you're talking about transfer reduction. But it's costs, servicing improvements. Revenue growth is another bucket, which is significant opportunity here once you start driving data insights, which we'll talk about later. The customer experience, you're going to see improved quality, consistency. If you eliminate transfers and you make a more consistent process, you're going to drive positive, NPS and a lot of other scores. Agent experience also. A lot of people don't think about this, but when you start injecting not just conversational intelligence, where you're evaluating across all of their calls and giving them a fair score for the work that they're doing, but you have tools like Copilot where you're starting to make their job easier and more efficient and effective in flow, and that drives a happier employee, which is important when it comes to retaining people. So with that being said, there's multiple paths that you can drive to in each of these different buckets to deliver value. And the first component is trying to set which ones are most important and appropriate for your business case. And in some instances, the answer may be all. But what we said is if you can't name the bucket, right, you're not going to be able to measure that success later. And then there's one other piece is that there are halo effects that you will see across all of these. You may not define them within your actual initial use case. An example would be something like risk avoidance. This is a big one where we see it in financial services that for regulatory infractions, the the probability that you're going to receive a fine may be very low. But the impact or the financial impact of that fine may be extremely high in the event it happens. So while we may calculate that as a soft cost and not put it straight into the ROI for some of the projects we're doing, we know that getting better data, better visibility, and being able to provide accurate, consistent information up front significantly reduces the odds of that happening. And that would be something, it may not show up on the ROI, but over time is definitely going to show up in your balance sheets.
Yeah. And I think the one piece that you said, that stuck with me. If you can't name the bucket, you can't measure success.
Yeah.
And that's almost, step one. Like you need to know what your efficiency or revenue pillars are, or whatever your success criteria is before, you even get into further conversations with any vendor for deploying AI in your work stream. Now, for those vendors that do have clarity on, what's going to be that specific pillar that's going to drive value for them. You mentioned a couple. You talked about operational efficiency. You talked about risk reduction. You talked about revenue. You talked about customer experience. But we also hear a lot of folks saying, "Hey, we want to do everything at once. I want to cut costs. I want to sell more. I want to drive the best customer experience." Right. So, in your experience, if a buyer is trying to tackle all of these at once, from day one, like do they fail? That's question one. And two, what do you think is going to be the safest first step or first pillar in terms of just for someone who's just entering the AI space, right? So, what's your recommendation and thought
Yeah.
process on that?
So I'll kind of knock on wood and say we haven't had the experience of failing on one of these implementations yet, but I will say there are differing levels of success between all of these. So that question is a great question. So when you think about these pillars, or when you think about, how do we align all of the different components of the project, and how do we set those expectations? Where I've found the success, in at least in my experience, my direct track record has been focusing on efficiency first. There, you're still going to get some halo revenue and CX effects by focusing on efficiency, but to lay it out, we've always moved forward with conversational intelligence. Our thought process was drive as much data as we can, get as much visibility and insights into everything, and use that to focus specifically on things like QA automation that has a very easy operational efficiency from a definition perspective. If I have 100 QA agents and I can reduce that are doing 5% evaluation, if I can reduce that to 30 or some other number, I can quantify what that is. I know I'm going to get that ROI, and I know exactly what steps I need to do that. Um, and along the way, you're going to continue driving insights and getting information that will enable you to take steps into some of the co-pilot, the automation components, and being able to drive or feed your agent with a generative AI. So those are things where I, I feel like it's very going back to the crawl, walk, run. Like start simple, start with something that you can outline. It has a very defined process and outcome that typically has been efficiency. But in the times where, as I hear, we want all three, we want everything now, and we want to see the results immediately. Those conversations are tough, and I think that's a lot more accountable to the person running the project. You need to set the expectations up front so that you don't have those conversations later where you do have disappointment as you're moving into the project. Eventually, you're going to get so much return out of these that there's a reason everyone is trying to get into it. There's a reason everyone's doing it. And there are real returns there, but there's certainly differing levels of success and I'll call it and pain. For someone on the business side that's implementing them that can be avoided by setting some of these expectations up front. So to be very specific, I would say implement if I had to do this again, I would start with conversational intelligence. That really sets your base for getting all of your data, all of your information and insights. It will tell you what's a good candidate for automation. It will tell you what's a good flow to attack, and and really that data becomes the driver of your strategy and all of your future gains that you're going to pull out of the software.
Yeah, I love that. And John, I know you do have a question, but Brian, just based off of what you said, right? You talked about efficiency and revenue, and I've heard different leaders and different stakeholders approach this differently. A lot of folks say, hey, at the end of the day, every business is here to make money, to generate revenue, so let's tackle the revenue pillar first. And usually that's going to be the pillar, like if you start seeing gains, it's a lot easier to get the buy-in from the rest of the organization. Versus efficiency is more around cost avoidance, cost reduction, and the return on investment is not as exponential as revenue. And so in situations like that, what's your take? Do you still um, say that efficiency is going to be a good start because it's going to have a multiplier effect on revenue and the other pillars that you're tackling, or is it okay to go ahead and start with revenue and then tackle efficiency?
So you can do it either way, but where I've seen it, and I think a lot of it depends on your particular business setup, and then some of things we won't get in today, which is what your stack is and your capabilities around IVR and some of your other native web capabilities. But with that being said, um, you the reason I always say to start on the operational efficiency side is specifically because QA is such a great use case for a lot of people that want to dip their toe in the water. And if they're a lot of people we find maybe 2, 10, 15% of the calls they're listening to, that effectively means you don't know what's happening on 85% of your calls. So if you can increase the amount of data that you're bringing in and you can make it consistent, then you can get a really good read on what's occurring in your contact center. When you have that, it helps open the door for some of those other things, specifically on the revenue side. And maybe we'll get into it later, or if anyone wants to reach out to me after this, I'm happy to have conversations about it as well. But when you get into sales, there's ability to take data and leverage that into routing buckets and agent, um, specifically the agent proficiencies, and that data becomes key for you to start driving true incremental revenue. So as you know your ability to separate calls out front and then route them to specific agents with different proficiencies, you can leverage all of the information that you're using to automate your QA function, which you had to do anyways to get some of your ROI, and then turn that into a huge source for driving incremental revenue. And we've seen a lot of success in that at very large scale with that approach.
Yeah, love that. Thank you.
Yeah, makes sense. And right, I think nobody's going to say no to the net benefits, right? Can I
Right.
do all these? Of course, but it's all about focus, right? And that helps you execute and build that plan. So, that advice of making sure you stay focused and clear on where to start doesn't mean you can't achieve those things later. But I guess a question, Brian, how do you help get those team specific and pull together that ROI calculation? I know you also mentioned the halo effect of some added benefits that aren't necessarily calculated in that. I love that concept of we're going to get this hard ROI, but there's more to be had here. But how do you help those teams get specific and start to dial in that ROI and set the expectations of what's to come?
Thanks. This is where you need to be specific, and you need to have real subject matter experts in your business. All right. When I worked for Sally Mae, we had a focused business optimization department specifically. And so within that department, we had a lot of wealth of knowledge across all of our different contact centers. And we were able to, have a finger on the pulse to say for all of the different opportunities, what we were trying to drive and how to go about getting some of those. So, if you're not fortunate to have that type of a structure, then maybe working with the contact center leaders in your area and some of your workforce management folks that know a lot about your ability to drive forecasting and a lot of the different interactions for your metrics. your or any of your KPIs might be a good place to start for that. But this is where there's no substitution for rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty. Like, we would look at things and say for the efficiencies which we've been talking about, we're going to set a 70% reduction in QA staffing. We're going to do it through 9 months, and we're specifically the how we're going to do it is going to be through the automation of QA. We're still going to retain 30% of our QA function, and we're going to use them as a check to checker even for the AI to continue to work with the leadership team on emerging trends, which I would highly recommend you do anyways. But that's a significant save that you'll get right out the bat. We knew how we were going to do it, and we planned a significant component of the ROI around it. We also started building dashboards and identifying opportunities, and you've got to be specific with this. A lot of contact center leaders or the board or leadership is going to say we need to reduce HT. And there may be some scenarios where that is the right goal, particularly on the servicing side of the business, right? But maybe just lowering AHT by itself is counterproductive. And the example that I'll give you is if you have a contact center that has 50% transfer rate and your transfer calls are all 30 seconds, well, if I reduce 50% of those, so 25% of my calls go away, but they were all 30-second calls, I've effectively significantly increased my AHT by doing the right thing. So you've got to make sure that you're not just superficially saying, I'm going to do a couple of these metrics. You got to think through the how. How am I going to do that? And then what are those impacts going to be as we move through time in the value recognition and the ROI? And then there's opportunities you're going to find in every contact center. How do I make the knowledge documents smart, right? How do I serve them up or pieces of them in flow and save agents from digging through information that doesn't matter, and that will reduce HT in that particular scenario, and you could quantify that. On the revenue side, as I was talking about before, what we did was looked at our candidates for automation, but we looked at sales calls specifically, and you have a component that's order takers, and you had some that required real selling where the buy decision hadn't been made. And so our ability to leverage the data to look at those calls and then split up and calculate on this percentage, how many incremental sales can I get if I could send all of my worst calls to this particular proficiency set? Um, and this is where when you sharpen your pencil on all of these different line items that we're going through, you really start seeing the ebb and flow and where you're going to get the value, when you're going to get the value, and specifically how you're going to get it. Um, so so for some of these in the revenue side, you can get the data, but you still need to work through with your teams on routing strategies, which ones lend themselves for automation. You've got, risk mitigation, which we covered before. Like as I said, we define that, but we don't necessarily, we quantify it as a soft cost, but don't pull it into the hard ROI for the project. On the customer experience side, you've got transfer rates that if we know we reduce the transfer rate, we're going to reduce X number of calls. We can figure out what that cost per call is. And these are easy quantifications that we can bake into this. Um, in some instances, by having automation, you can now go from having a defined set of hours to 24/7, which can bring a lot of different streams of efficiency in. And then finally, a lot of people don't talk about the agent experience that much as a huge selling point, but it really is. And the ability to eliminate turnover from a user experience perspective is great. What we find with automation is that the agents didn't like doing the high volume repetitive calls anyways. They want to be challenged. They want to think through and solve challenging problems and feel good about it. And they also don't want to be sitting in the swivel chair scenario where they're switching back and forth through 12 different programs just to find a meaningful content to give information to a customer. So by leveraging these tools, you can put yourself in a position to make their job significantly easier, and also significantly happier. So
Yeah.
when you put all of this information together and you package it up, and then you go back to what we said for the crawl, walk, run, and you define, here's the benefits we're going to get, this is how we're going to get them, and this is the time period, that level of specificity allows you to go into a board or sit down with your leadership table, tell the full investment story, set the expectations on when you're actually going to receive that value and benefit, and then allow you to not have to worry about course correcting and focus on real value delivery as you get this project underway. And that's what I found has been a very successful combination. And we've repeated it 3 times over at this point.
Yeah. Wow. So you gave a lot of detail on the KPIs that you're tracking, right? So I think ideally those KPIs and the level of, depth is standard in both pre-sales and post-sales conversations. But we have noticed that when we're having these conversations on, hey, what KPIs do you want to track? Once they've identified the KPIs, what's to your point, right? I want to reduce my transfer by 15%. I want to increase my QA automation to 70% in a 3 month, 6 month timeline. That level of clarity and that level of information, not a lot of stakeholders that we're interacting with as part of the purchasing cycle are armed with, right? So in those situations, I think the way I'm thinking about it is yes, you have the AI vendor, you have the solution who's obviously going to play a huge role in providing you that consultative guidance on how to think about deploying or measuring success once you deploy AI. But what about the people on the other side, the prospects making the decision to buy AI, right? Who are the right stakeholders who you think are going to be armed with this level of detail that can then come to the AI vendor and let them know, hey, this is exactly what we're looking for. And how do you think, do you think that plays a major role in influencing the purchasing decision at all?
It yeah, I think it plays a significant role, and I've seen it now because I've done this with 3 different companies, handled several different ways. So the most effective way where I saw the approach was where we were fortunate to have an optimization department. And so within that optimization department, and in this case, I managed that department, so that was a natural leeway for me to get into doing this. But when we started talking about our objectives and our goals back at the beginning, we didn't go out with the object of implementing AI. What we did was go out with, here are our strategic pillars. This is what we're looking to accomplish as a company, right? Here are the options that are on the table on how to approach that. And then and that was all being set. So you can use this to your advantage. That's all being set by the board and by the senior leadership team. So when you have that clarity in your strategy and your objectives, then this job becomes much easier. Whereas now you're taking that information and you have to find the to your point, you come the stakeholders in the business who's best positioned to do this. So if you have an optimization department or something similar to that, efficient business efficiency or process, that's the team that I would engage, or the people I would engage first. They tend to have great visibility across all the KPIs, all the milestones. They know the ins and outs of the business, and they're in a good position to start to build that stack of benefits that are going to come out of this. And they know enough detail to get into how they're going to do it. But a lot of businesses don't have that now. So when you don't, then another way I've seen it successful is using the contact center leader themselves, which is challenging because they have a lot of other responsibilities and people that they're managing simultaneously. But I started to mention this earlier. If you have them as a point of contact that can define what they're looking to accomplish or where they think some of the opportunities are, then typically partnering with a workforce management team or a forecasting team that knows about the ins and outs of the business and what levers affect which particular components, then you can engage them. And you really are going to need someone to own this start to finish. You need someone that is going to be responsible for pulling the information down from your contact center leader, going across to your workforce teams, or going across to your technology teams and understanding what capabilities do we have in our IVR? What APIs do we have? How do we, what is our ability to then route and drive routing strategies from some of the information? Or how do we collect it? If we don't have a natural language IVR, are we gonna build out multiple DTMF menus to have people go through? Like, there's so many different components. Like, your best success is going to be to have one person that's accountable. And if you have to do a distributed leadership team, then you're going to want to have someone that's going to be able to go through, pull them all together, bundle it up, and then you're probably going to be most successful having that contact center leader present that, or bring in the board, or tandem present to the board.
Yeah, I love that. And especially the fact that, you are right. These decisions and, these KPIs, these targets, they're already established. They're coming, top down. And so when you are, the way I'm taking this information is when you are looking for a vendor, especially around like deploying AI solutions for contact centers, think about, investing in a vendor which is actually going to fit into the organization's broader vision, not just simply chasing, a KPI answer for the next 6 months. Think about
Right.
the entire organization's vision, goal, journey, and how does this vendor actually help drive that. So yeah, I really love that. Now that we've talked about, the key stakeholders that should be involved in the decision making, identifying what those value pillars are, now comes the part about measuring success, right? So, how do we go about measuring success once these gains have been defined?
So this is one of the many fun parts of this. But when when you start collecting the data, and then you start seeing all of the different trends that you have going on in your business that you didn't have visibility before, really opens your eyes to a lot of different things. Similar things like how many agents read a specific disclosure versus didn't. Um, if you had asked one person, you might have heard we read it 99% of the time, and the data may say it was closer to 80, right? Um, no specific businesses referenced there. But these are scenarios where once you have that data, you can do so many different things with it. And there's going to be as with everything, there's no one size fits all sort of approach for this. So with Observe, and which was the last implementation that I did, as you're very familiar with, Observe has a huge suite of analytics that is contained within the conversational intelligence. So one of the things you get right off the bat is you start seeing dashboards, and you start seeing how your agents compare against some of these previously defined KPIs. Um, you still are going to have to take time out and look at all of the data that you have in your business and figure out how you can pull that in to reports and what reports matter. I can tell you specifically which ones we did that were effective, but it may not matter for your business. A lot of this is going to boil down to, like, what are your actual pillars, what are your objectives, and then mapping those back. So ultimately, it's the definition of KPIs. But as I said, be avoid trying to have just one beacon KPI like AHT, because and I've seen this happen personally, which is why I keep bringing it up. But you can have such a positive influence by removing transfers and getting that churn out of your contact center that will effectively increase your AHT, even though your call length never got longer. You just removed a very short portion of bad calls. So you've got to have a suite of metrics that you're looking at, and you've got to have someone that understands and digs in at that level of depth to say, I know in this particular scenario there's going to be upward pressure on AHT, and these 10 things are going to have downward pressure, and here's the quantity. And so that's something that you're going to work with your teams on, and your analytics teams to build out. Not only here are the KPIs, but we're going to distribute them. I love taking those KPIs and building them into a dashboard personally, because we had a weekly meeting that we set up with our executives, and every Thursday we would go through and we would talk about the KPIs. And so they were front and center, top of mind. Everyone knew where we were. If something wasn't tracking or trending where we thought it was, then we had a conversation, explained why and what we were doing to bring it on. So, while dashboards aren't going to be the one size fits all solution, you're still going to have reports, and you have to define your KPIs. That suite of everything is really what's going to drive that visibility that will make you successful. And back to what we said before, if you can't define the bucket, you can't measure the success. This is the fun part. This is how do you measure the success? And it might be a little bit different for everyone that's watching the webinar right now. But that's the great part about AI in general, is that there's just a tremendous ability to mine and pull all of this information out that you never had at your fingertips before.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that information is illuminating, right? Like you mentioned disclosures, but there's probably 100 different data points that open your eyes to things you thought were going on, or certain thresholds that you thought you were meeting or clearing, and come to find out, the story's a little different.
Yeah.
Um, I guess, having that visibility is crucial for the organization, and I know you said it's the fun part, you touched on a little bit. The other fun part I would say is, what actions do you take out of it? What comes after the dashboards? Once you stand these up and everybody's on the same page, yeah, how do you move beyond dashboards to action?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. So I think when you start thinking about the or if you talk about the original the business cases that you've defined, I look at this and say we are um, we're gonna leverage all that information to start level setting and communicating at a broader level out across the organization or to the appropriate levels within our teams. And so that's probably the first and most important component, is just driving the communication. But one of the things that you have to be aware of too is the impact on agents at first. While long term it's positive it upfront, um, there's still some hesitancy that you will experience when you go from evaluating 2% of a person's or 5% of a person's calls to 98% of a person's calls. And we had a lot of success in just having great open communication, explaining why we are doing this, and we explained why it was in their best interests, which is a very easy conversation. If you're doing the right thing and we listen to 95% of your calls, we're going to find that you're doing the right thing over and over and over again. And it's gonna be a lot better than if you've made one bad call and we were only listening to 10. That's you're at a 90% versus a 99%. This is how we laid it out and explained it to them. And I think it's important that not only just getting your leadership buy-in that we've been talking about the whole time, but getting it across to everybody, even your QA team. And we explained to them what the process was going to look like, and exactly why we're doing it. And ultimately, we had a tremendous amount of success doing this. I would say in one organization particularly, we came out with a set of dashboards that we customized, not just at the KPI level, but we did it all the way down to the department, team, individual agent. So they could go and see every single call they took. They could see how it was scored in every component of it, and it made them better. So the one other component that I think it's important is that I don't think there's any scenario that I've seen where it's magic, where you just put install the basic software or you build out your first automation and you get conversational intelligence and then you walk away. You've got to understand that you're gonna need a small number of people to stay behind, continue to work with the data, continue to work with the people, and make sure that everything is working exactly as expected. And we've seen a tremendous amount of success in doing that.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I think we hear that all the time. I see that all the time, right? The scaling of automation, where it isn't a like buy an AI, set it and forget it. It is, how do you actually strategically implement this and also grow it across the board? Um, so I guess maybe a two-part question on that, in getting there. How do you scale that automation, and what role does AI agents and co-pilots fit into that?
Yeah.
You said start with conversation intelligence, but now that the
Yeah.
system's running, KPIs are clear. how do you scale it, and what role do those capabilities play?
Yeah, so this is great, and this is where it gets a little on the complicated side. So a lot of the insights that you're pulling back as you're getting visibility into your conversational intelligence, you're going to start seeing separation in different cohorts within your contact centers. One of the examples I will give you is if you have a lot of people have an order taker call versus a true sales call where a buy decision hasn't been made and you need some higher level skill or experience in order to complete that sale. And we saw that very easily in our data. We could see the two, but we needed to figure out, how do you turn that into incremental revenue? And that's where your IVR routing, call flow strategy, and everything comes into play. So what we were able to do is go back and look at the data, find their utterances, say, what are people saying when they come in and they're ready to take an order? So it would be, and I'm not going to give specific examples because I don't want to talk about the individual company. But we would be able to look and see if you said, these three words, it meant that you were calling in for, and there's a number of combinations. You were calling in to just complete an order. But if you said things like, I'm talking to other people, or I haven't made a decision yet, or something to that, any of those, keywords, we create a second intent, and those two intents, based off the customer's words in our IVR, would drive the call treatment. And so we could say, I'm going to send, and this is for instance, if someone was newer and didn't have a strong sales background, well, if you were an order taker, I can send the call right to you. I know there's very low risk of it not converting, and you're going to be able to complete it. If the sale wasn't made, I'm going to send you to someone with a higher proficiency level, and I'm going to give you a true opportunity to convert and close that sale on the call same time. And we did that by looking at not just the data from our contact center, the transcripts, but we looked at the utterances. We built an intent strategy. We pulled that through to our IVR. We implemented a natural language IVR, and we used that to then drive further separation. And ultimately, all of those things equate to I have a specific strategy that I used AI for to take a person, get them to the right person, the right time, and the person that had the highest propensity for them to convert into a sale. And that's where you start seeing separation in your ROI. The reason I said at the beginning is we don't start there is because there's so many other different types of reward and benefits that you can drive for the project on that path to collecting the data, that it doesn't make sense to just start there and overlook everything. But in your mind, you can start parsing that data out and bifurcating some of your populations, as we just talked about, and trying to drive real incremental revenue value. And at that point in time, you're already deep into your original ROI around QA automation, and you're starting to use that data to separate some servicing opportunities around AHTs or any other thing that, cohort that's developed. Hopefully that answers your question.
Very much so. Lots of wonderful info in there. That yeah, I think having beginning with the end in mind, as you mentioned, right? You can pick that use case, you can pick it, but it's also all the information that appears along the way. And starting with that strong foundation of insights really becomes transformational, where you can figure out even the right places to invest, how to scale, how to get going. So yeah, I mean, tons of good information. I guess to double touch on one point, as this program continues to grow and you've got the right caller to the right agent, you've optimized that system. How do you look at the AI system itself to keep improving it or
That's
expanding use cases there?
that's great. I actually didn't mention the second component that you had asked in the first question, so apologies for that. But this is specifically around components of real-time assistance and like Copilot. Um, these are opportunities, and I will say these will be different for every organization that looks at this. but there will be value there regardless. It's just whether you determine to use AI agents or Copilot first, whether it makes sense. It's really going to depend on your specifics on the business side. But what I would say is we see on servicing in particular a lot of opportunity for using a Copilot, using real-time assistance in serving not just call flow scripting to help people move efficiently through the conversation, but also where they used to go look through a knowledge doc. Now that doc is being parsed real time, and then only the appropriate content is being pulled back and served to that agent, which stops them from. I know there's a lot of people that are going to watch this that are going to go, yeah, how many people at times have I watched an agent read through 8 pages to figure out what phrase I need to say back to a customer? Um, so these are opportunities where once you know where your opportunities are, you know where your high AHT calls are or your complex calls, you can start looking at Copilot and saying, how do I really start focusing on this particular component or segment by creating efficiency and driving and pulling information in real time and guiding them. And that example is on the servicing side. On the sales side, there's even more opportunity where you can serve up strategic phrases or effective phrases that have been used to help close or seal deals before, or things that are overcoming objections, something that's relative to overcoming objection. You can throw it up real time and it can leverage that information that's going to be specific to the conversation that's occurring on the call in the time that it's occurring. And you're going to see a lot higher close rate with those as well. And we have seen that time and time again on the sales side with overcoming objections. On the AI agent side, uh, so we did a lot of this. So when we first started into data, our objective was automation, automation, automation with one of the companies I worked with, and and what we found is that there's good automation candidates, and then there's some not so good automation candidates, which uh, my advice to everyone that's getting into this is when you're looking at candidates for automation, focus on high volume, high repetition calls. Find or customer flows. If you can find things that that happen over and over and over again, and they're a consistent process, that's a perfect candidate for automation. And you're also going to improve your UX for your agents the exact same time that you do it because they don't like doing the high repetition, high very repetitive calls. So I would avoid anything that is either not a lot of volume or specifically has a ton of complexity to that particular flow. I think that's something I would leverage in my IVR and keep that in agents it, at least until we get to a stage where you've automated everything else and you have nothing else to automate. And then maybe there's an opportunity to get into that. But and then last but not least, I I would say, we need to focus on, or at least make sure that you're not eliminating all of your human controls around this particular set of AI tools. You're still going to want people there. You're going to need people to not only man and interpret dashboards, but you want people looking objectively across everything and looking for new trends and surfacing new trends and looking for areas of opportunity that are not defined within the original business case that was out there. And I think if you leverage these tools in that particular manner, you'll see significant opportunity and benefit from them. It'll save you from stepping in some of the potholes that I stepped in the first time.
Yeah, I have to give it to you, Brian. I love your milestone based approach. It's so repeatable, but also, you've got clear goals set, and you're not setting up the other teams that are going to be leveraging the platform and the solution for failure, right? You need to have
That's
those checkpoints. So, thank you for sharing that. I know we're coming up, at time. So, if you were to, have the audience today take away maybe 3 or 5 top biggest tips in terms of making this decision and proving success with an AI investment, what would those be? I already got one that you said that was about when you're talking about automation, like choose wisely, think about like
Yeah.
high volume, repetitive workflows. But what other tips would you want the buyers to take away
Yeah,
from?
I mean, I really I'm going to go all the way back to one of the beginning components, and don't be afraid to be very specific when you're defining your use cases. This is probably the number one component, not only to successfully bridging the gap from concept to purchase and moving forward. Those numbers and those metrics are going to resonate with your board. They're going to resonate with your leadership team. They're going to show that you've demonstrated and done the due diligence required in order to fully understand how this is going to positively affect the company. And so, my number one tip, even before automation or anything, is don't underestimate or under invest in your time building out that business case. I think that's ultimately what's going to drive the majority of your success, and probably some of your sanity as well. So the more that you have those numbers defined, the better else everyone will understand what you're doing, and the less questions you'll field later on. But then, yes, I would also advise people to pay attention to the IVR. So getting information via conversational intelligence is so eye-opening and so incredibly valuable. You need to be able to do something with it. And and there are going to be easy things that you can do through education, continuing education, and leadership with that data. But there are going to be some things that you're just going to need to pull through an IVR. You're going to need to separate a population. You're going to need to route differently. So make sure when you're getting into this as well, if you don't have more modern of an IVR, that you're considering that on the front end, that we can move into AI and we can get a lot of these benefits. But when we really get into the later milestones and we want to start driving some separation, we want to look at some of those components as well so that we can deliver on them and separate the population. Um, and I think we've covered,
Yeah,
just scrolling
yeah,
through some of my notes, like, most most of everything. One thing that we didn't spend a lot of time on, but I do think it's important, depending on the size of your organization, making sure everybody is bought in to what you're doing and socializing it with everyone. Even things like, when you're in operations in a contact center, you may not necessarily think to go to marketing to talk to marketing about some of the things that you're doing, or the conversational intelligence that you're driving, and you'll find there's a huge hunger from your marketing department to digest some of that data and figure out how to leverage it to on the front end. You'll find that by incorporating and bringing in a broader group of people, if you're agile in your application delivery, you're going to find out that you'll get more support and you'll have the ability to probably prioritize and bring work through faster. So there's a lot of other benefits associated with socializing across the company, and making sure that you have, it's not just buy-in, it's more of making sure that you've just have visibility across everyone, because you're going to find a lot of people will jump in and have a lot of interest on this right at the onset, and it may help you with being able to push this through quicker.
yeah, completely agreed. Um, John, any other questions from you for Brian?
No, we covered a lot, and I'm still stewing on it. I mean, those are wonderful takeaways. And I mean, to your last point, right? This is going to affect a lot of different departments. A transformation like this, I'm sure there's plenty of opinions, but there's a lot of tailwinds that can be created across the organization once you uncover all of that data now flowing in. No other questions. Just yeah, trying to synthesize it myself, and it's been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, Brian, I know John and I personally, we would love to have you again on the webinar, like, dissecting more topics. But I'm very confident that the audience today is going to walk away with so much information that's going to help them in their decision-making journey. So really want to take the time to thank you for spending the time with us, sharing such valuable insights for us, for the audience. This is exactly the buyer's guide that we had in mind, that we wanted to bring to the market. Practical, milestone-based, and an honest take on what it really takes to drive that return on investment. So thank you so much for helping us out with this.
Well,
And
thank you, Sneha. Thank you, John. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and likewise would be honored to come back if there's any other topics you'd like to discuss.
Great.
Um, for anyone else that's watching the webinar, if you have specific questions, more than happy to answer them. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to talk through my experience if you have specific questions.
yeah, John, thank you for co-hosting this session with me. You've been a lovely co-host. And to everybody in the audience, thank you for, your time, for joining. Hopefully, we answered a lot of your questions. If you have more questions, someone on our team will be there to follow up. We will be sending a recording and follow-up resources to everyone, including a buyer to ROI milestone checklist. I know this is our last session for 2025, so I do want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and we will see you all in 2026. All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.